Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you tonight. We're going to continue reading in our book, The Long Winter, by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Chapter 5, After the Storm. On the fourth morning, there was a queer feeling in Laura's ears. She peeped from under the quilts and saw snow drifted over the bed. She heard the little crash of the stove lid and then the first crackling of the fire. Then she knew why her ears felt empty. The noise of the blizzard had stopped. "Wake up, Mary," she sang out, poking Mary with her elbow. "The blizzard's over." She jumped out of the warm bed into cold air, colder than ice. The hot stove seemed to give out no heat at all. A pail of snow water was almost solidly frozen, but the frosted windows were gleaming with sunshine. "It's as cold as ever outside," Pa said when he came in. He bent over the stove to thaw the icicles from his mustache. They sizzled on the stove top and went up in steam. Pa wiped his mustache and went on. The winds tore a big piece of tar paper off the roof. Tight as it was nailed on, it still blew it off. No wonder the roof leaked rain and snow. "Anyway, it's over," Laura said. "It was a pleasure to be eating breakfast and see the yellow glowing window panes. We'll have an Indian summer yet." Ma was sure. This storm was so early, it can't be the beginning of winter. "I never knew a winter to set in so early," Pa admitted. "But I don't like the feel of things." "What things, Charles?" Ma wanted to know. Pa couldn't exactly say. He said, "There's some stray cattle by the haystacks." "Are they tearing down the hay?" Ma asked quickly. "No," Pa said. "And what of it? If they aren't doing any harm," Ma said. "I guess they're tired out by the storm," said Pa. "They took shelter there by the haystacks. I thought I'd let them rest and eat a little before I drove them off. I can't afford to let them tear down the stacks, but they could eat a little without doing any harm." "But they aren't eating." "What's wrong then?" Ma asked. Nothing, said Pa. "They're just standing there." "That's nothing to upset a body," said Ma. "No," Pa said, and he drank his tea. "Well, I might as well go drive them off." He put on his coat and cap and mittens again and went out. After a moment, Ma said, "You might as well go with him, Laura. He may need some help to drive them away from the hay." Quickly, Laura put Ma's big shawl over her head and pinned it snugly under her chin with the shawl pin. The woolen folds covered her from head to foot. Even her hands were under the shawl. Only her face was out. Outdoors, the sun glittered, and it hurt her eyes. She breathed a deep breath of the tingling cold and squinted her eyes to look around her. The sky was hugely blue, and all the land was blowing white. The straight, strong wind did not lift the snow, but drove it scuttling across the prairie. The cold stung Laura's cheeks. It burnt in her nose and tingled in her chest and came out as steam in the air. She held a fold of shawl across her mouth, and her breath was frost on it. Then she passed the corner of the stable. She saw Pa going ahead of her, and she saw the cattle. She stood and stared. The cattle were standing in sunshine and shadow by the haystacks, red, brown, and spotted cattle, and one thin black one. They stood perfectly still. Every head bowed down to the ground. The hairy red necks and the brown necks all stretched down from the bony, gaunt shoulders of the monstrous, swollen, white heads. "Pa!" Laura screamed. Pa motioned her to stay where she was. She went on trudging through the low-flying snow towards those creatures. They did not seem like real cattle. They stood so terribly still. In the whole herd, there was not the least movement. Only their breathing sucked their hairy sides in between the rib bones and pushed them out again. Their hip bones and shoulder bones stood up sharply. That means they were way too thin. Their legs were braced out, stiff and still, and where their heads should be, swollen white lumps seemed fast to the ground under the blowing snow. On Laura's head, the hair prickled up and the horror went down her backbone. Tears from the sun and the wind swelled out her staring eyes and ran cold on her cheeks. Pa went slowly against the wind. He walked up to the herd. Not one of the cattle moved. For a moment, Pa stood looking. Then he stooped and quickly did something. Laura heard a bellow, and a red steer's back humped and jumped. The red steer ran, swaggering and bawling. It had an ordinary head now, with eyes and nose and an open mouth bawling out steam in the wind. Another one bellowed and ran a short, staggering run. Then another. Pa was doing the same thing to them all, one by one. Their bawling rose up to the cold sky. At last, they all drifted away together. They went silently now in the knee-deep spray of blowing snow. I'll show you what Pa was doing and what they looked like. Pa waved to Laura to go back to the shanty while he inspected the haystacks. "Whatever kept you so long, Laura?" Ma asked. Did the cattle get into the haystacks?" "No, Ma," she answered. I guess their heads were frozen to the ground." "Oh, that can't be," Ma exclaimed. "It must be one of Laura's queer notions," Mary said, busily knitting in the chair by the stove. "How could cattle's head freeze to the ground, Laura?" "It's really worrying the way you talk sometimes." "Well, ask Pa then," Laura said shortly. She was not able to tell Ma and Mary what she felt. She felt that somehow the wild night and storm and the stillness was underneath all sounds of the prairie, and it had grabbed hold of, the cattle. When Pa came in, Ma asked him, "What was wrong with the cattle, Charles?" "Their heads were frozen over with ice and snow," said Pa. "Their breath froze over their eyes and their noses till they couldn't see nor breathe." Laura stopped sweeping. "Pa, their own breath smothering them?" she said in horror. Pa understood how she felt. He said, "They're all right, Laura. I broke the ice off their heads. They're breathing now, and I guess they'll make it to shelter somewhere." Carrie and Mary were wide-eyed, and even Ma stood horrified. She said briskly, "Get your sweeping done, Laura. And Charles, for pity's sake, why don't you take off your wraps and warm yourself?" "I got something to show you," Pa said. He took his hand carefully out of his pocket. "Look here, girls. Look at what I found hidden in the haystack." Slowly he opened his hand. In the hollow of his hand was a little bird. He gently put it in Mary's hands. "Why, it's standing straight up," Mary exclaimed, touching it lightly with her fingertips. They had never seen a bird like it. It was small, but it looked exactly like the picture of the great auk in Pa's green book, The Wonders of the Animal World. It had the same white breast and black back and wings, same short legs placed far back, and the same large webbed feet. It stood straight up on its short legs like a tiny man with black-coated trousers. That's an old-fashioned name for pants. And a white shirt front. And its little black wings were like arms. "Oh, what is it, Pa? What is it?" Carrie cried in delight as she held Grace's eager hands. "Mustn't touch, Grace." "I never saw anything like it," said Pa. "It must have tired out in the storm winds and dropped down and struck against the haystack. It had crawled into the hay for shelter." "It's a great auk," Laura declared, "only it's a little one. It's full grown. It isn't a nestling," said Ma. "Look at its feathers." "Yes, it's full grown, whatever it is," Pa agreed. The little bird stood straight up on Mary's soft palm and looked at them all with its bright black eyes. "It's never seen humans before," said Pa. "How do you know, Pa?" Mary asked. "Because it isn't afraid of us," said Pa. "Oh, can we keep it, Pa? Can't we, Ma?" Carrie begged. "Well, that depends," said Pa. Mary's fingertips touched the little bird all over, while Laura told her how white its smooth breast was, and how very black its back and tail and little wings were. Then they let Grace touch it very carefully. The little auk sat still and looked at them. They set it on the floor, and it walked a little way. Then it pushed its webbed feet tiptoe against the boards and flapped its little wings. "It can't get going," said Pa. "It's a water bird. It must start from the water where it can use those webbed feet to get up to speed." Finally, they put it in the box in the corner. It stood there looking up at them with its round black eyes and they wondered what it ate. "It was a strange storm all around," said Pa. "I didn't like it." "Why, Charles, it's only a blizzard," Ma said. "We'll likely have nice weather now. It's beginning to warm up a little already." Mary stood up her knitting again, and Laura went on sweeping. Pa stood by the window, and after a while Carrie led Grace away from the little auk, and they looked out too. "Oh, look, jackrabbits!" Carrie exclaimed. All around the stables, dozens of jackrabbits were hopping. "The rascals had been living in our hay all through the storm," Pa said. "I ought to take my gun and get us a rabbit stew." But he had been standing at the window looking at them without making a move towards the gun. "Please let them go, Pa, this one time," Laura pleaded. "When they came here because they had to. They had to find shelter." Pa looked at Ma, and Ma smiled. "We aren't hungry, Charles, and I'm thankful we all got through that storm." "Well, I guess I could spare the jackrabbits a little hay," said Pa. He took the water pail and went to the well. The air that came in when he opened the door was very cold, but the sun was already beginning to melt the snow in the south side of the shanty. Well, maybe it'll be nice weather now. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I hope you're enjoying these stories. I want to pray blessings on you and yours in your house and out in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. Good night and God bless you.